Well, the day's here. Early voting in the state of Illinois for the November 8th general midterm election. Good morning. I'm Greg Bishop on 92.7 WMAY, Springfield's News and Talk. So what that means is you can go down to your county clerk's office and cast a ballot. Of course, the November 8th general election still weeks away, but early voting starting today. And there's all kinds of things that you have to consider on the ballots, from who's going to be the next U.S. Senator, who's going to be your next member of Congress, who's going to be your state house rep, who's going to be your state house senator. Also on the ballot is state house offices for like governor, treasurer, comptroller, attorney general, and even secretary of state. And that's going to be an interesting one because you've got Jesse White, who's been in that office for decades. He is actually now not seeking re-election, so you've got a choice between a Democrat, Alexi Janulius, or a Republican in Dan Brady. And Dan Brady actually is going to be holding a news conference a little bit later on about an endorsement he's going to receive. So we'll be monitoring that. But Governor J.B. Pritzker will be here in Springfield later on today as part of his campaign, not as part of his official duties, but he's going to be in office, or rather at the Sangamon County Clerk's office this afternoon to usher in early voting. So early voting's one thing, but it's not just early voting that starts today. You've also got the mail-in ballots that are going to be sent across the state from local elections officials starting today. So if you requested a mail-in ballot, you can expect to see that in your mailbox here soon. But all of the mail-in ballots that there are out there, it's very likely that you're not going to know the outcome of the election night. And for some of these major races, like the statewide races, governor, attorney general, U.S. Senate, the constitutional amendments that's on the ballots to codify collective bargaining rights in the Illinois Constitution. So all of those things, of course, are going to be up for you to consider starting today with early voting. So the dates today is just the first phase of early voting. There's another phase of early voting in October where they may have off-site hours and also extended hours at clerk's offices. But the mail-in voting aspect is what we're going to focus on here. And in particular, you've got nearly 500,000 mail-in ballots that are queued up to be sent out. And those 500,000 mail-in ballots, that's compared to around 427,000 in 2018. Now, in 2020, mail-in voting was expanded from absentee balloting to just mail-in voting because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And believe it or not, there were around 2 million mail-in ballots in 2020. But for the November 8th, 2022 election, there's around 463,000 mail-in ballots that are queued up to be sent out. I talked with Matt Dietrich, the spokesperson for the Illinois State Board of Elections, and he said that voters need to know that indeed there's going to be some delay in actually knowing the true outcome of the election. And what does that ultimately mean? Because November 8th, we typically, in the past, we've always gotten projections. So-and-so's the projected winner. So-and-so's the projected winner. They won by X amount of votes. And it's just the projected winner. But it's going to be a bit before we actually know that outcome. Again, here's Matt Dietrich from the Illinois State Board of Elections.
It really depends on how many vote-by-mail ballots are still out on election night.
So how many mail-in ballots are still going to be out? I would imagine, you're going to see the tally even before November 8th of how many mail-in ballots have been sent in. Those ballots received on Election Day will be held, and by Election Day, at the end of the evening, they'll then open those up and count those for Election night. But there's still going to be some ballots floating around in up to 2 weeks after polls close November 8th. So when you've got nearly 500,000 ballots out there in the mail, who knows how many are going to be in by election night, but there could be up to 2 weeks for the rest of the ballots to come through. Here's more from Matt Dietrich from the State Board of Elections.
We do want to be clear to people that this is normal. You're going to see those numbers change, especially in the 5 or so days immediately after the election. That's when the bulk of the properly postmarked ballots will arrive.
And again, Dietrich says that this is something he says is normal. And I don't think it's necessarily normal when you look back into the past, into the 2012 election, for instance. But he does point to in 2014 the state treasurer's race back then, hinging on mail-in ballots that came in after the November 8th election.
They had a race that was too close to call on election night, and it was only after the mail ballots came in those days after the election that Mike Frerich's margin of victory expanded to several thousand votes.
So again, mail-in balloting, those ballots are going to be sent out today, along with early voting taking place, and with all the nearly 500,000 of mail-in ballots out there. And that could change. Not everybody's going to vote by mail who requested a mail-in ballot. And if you don't use your mail-in ballot, you have to surrender it or destroy it if you want to vote in person. And there's also pretty rigorous tracking measures to track the mail-in ballots, so they've got that under control. But when I talked not long ago with a researcher for the Heritage Foundation, they ranked Illinois as the 40th in election integrity. And when I spoke with Nick Smith from the Heritage Foundation, he said mail-in balloting is one of those areas that's of the most concern, just because it could be rife with fraud. Here's Nick Smith.
Illinois doesn't have very robust restrictions against vote harvesting and vote trafficking.
So with that in mind, it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out on election night, especially with those mail-in ballots, because, again, as the spokesperson for the Illinois State Board of Elections stated, Matt Dietrich, we're not going to know the true outcome for possibly up to 2 weeks after the election.
It really depends on how many vote-by-mail ballots are still out on election night. We do want to be clear to people that this is normal. You're going to see those numbers change, especially in the 5 or so days immediately after the election. That's when the bulk of the properly postmarked ballots will arrive.
So again, early voting starts today, mail-in ballots going out into the mail, and a whole lot of things for people to consider on this November 8th election. And that is, of course, from U.S. Senate to U.S. Congress to even seats in county government and more. I'd love to hear your thoughts at 217-629-7970. Let's go ahead and head to the phones real quick here. Good morning. You're on WMAY.
Morning.
Hey.
Why don't they have the mail-in ballot, deadline be earlier so that there's not this big 2-week lag afterwards? And then my second question would be, how long of a lag was there for the 2 million in 2020 mail-in ballots?
I think the state law gives 2 weeks. So that's like the deadline after 2 weeks from the election. And mail-in ballots, even counted up to 2 weeks after the election, have to be postmarked by November 8th. But I've heard others suggest what you're suggesting. Make the mail-in balloting deadline to receive those ballots no later than 7 p.m. election night when the polls close. And I don't know if that's a conversation that's been had at the State House or how exactly that could possibly come about. But you would think that a lot of other states are going to know. Night of November 8th. They're going to know who's going to be their U.S. Senator. They're going to know whatever constitutional amendments are being proposed for their Constitution. They're going to know night of. But in Illinois, with nearly 500,000 mail-in ballots out there, things could change overnight and in the days preceding the November 8th election.
Yeah, I just think that is a very odd thing that you would allow 2 weeks. It's like we didn't really like what happened on November 8th, so we're going to give another 2 weeks, so hopefully that can change. It just seems like an odd, that's odd when it's perfectly fixable by making it earlier that it's due, and then you don't have any question or concern about maybe some election integrity, voter integrity, et cetera.
So you seem to kind of go counter to what the State Board of Elections is saying, that say, listen, public, this is normal.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't why would that be? That doesn't seem normal. I mean, most of the time, my opinion is going to be opposite of what a government official is going to say because they don't seem to think like normal people. I think they're a little out of touch on that kind of stuff. I think they do some things that benefit what they want and not necessarily. I bet if you ask the public, even the people that are taking the initiative to get a mail-in ballot, like to change that by 1 or 2 weeks, like would not really affect that because these people are pretty proactive and responsible, it seems, to request one of these early enough to have it. Now, why they're waiting that long to send it in, I don't know. But if you just change the rule, then people have to follow it. It's not that hard.
Well, and mail-in balloting was originally there for absentees, members of Congress, members of the military, rather, serving overseas, or maybe you had a family trip, or maybe, you've got a business trip, or whatever the case may be. You're not at the actual location for being able to go to the polls. But because of COVID, it expanded, and we just kind of said, okay, we like this, but I don't think everybody's on board with it, especially the idea of having to wait up to 2 weeks to get finality in the election. I appreciate the call. All right, 217-629-7970. That's how you can always chime in live and local here with Springfield's Morning News. Got to take a break, though.